Welcome to Coffee with Catholic Workers, a podcast made by and for Catholic workers. I'm Theo.
And I'm Lydia. We've both been a part of the Catholic Worker for the last decade, and we're excited to bring to you conversations with Catholic workers from around the world.
We spoke with Fumi Tosu for this episode. We talked to him about the difference between starting a new house and continuing the work of an existing community, why the new Portland Catholic Worker is named for a weed, and the influence of his family history on his peace activism.
Now, let's get to our interview with Fumi.
Fumi, welcome to Coffee with Catholic Workers. Thanks for taking some time and talking to us today. Let's start like we always do. How did you find the Catholic worker movement?
You know, I knew you would start with this question, so over lunch I was thinking about it, and I remembered something I'd long forgotten, which is that the very first time I met the Catholic worker was when I was a Jesuit volunteer in New York in 99, 2000. And one of my housemates took me to First Street for a Friday night roundtable for the clarification of thought. And that first time, I was thoroughly unimpressed. I can't remember what the topic was, but I just felt the conversation was scattered. And I was like, I don't know who these people are. And it's confusing to follow, and everything is chaotic. And this is really against my middle-class sensibilities. And then the second time I met the Catholic worker was later that year in New York at Easter time, at Good Friday. There was the Stations of the Cross that they do around the city. And we joined that, and it seemed like everybody I met on that Stations of the Cross was somehow connected to the Catholic worker. And I thought, well, this is cool. I've never been to a Stations of the Cross like this. And it ended at some warship, the USS Intrepid or something like that, and people were being arrested and leafleting. And I thought, yeah, this is a really cool way to celebrate Good Friday. So that had a more positive impact on my young mind. And then I really wasn't connected to the Catholic worker for a long time after that. Peter Morin talks about a movement where the scholars shall be workers and the workers shall be scholars. And I'm definitely a scholar trying to be a worker. And so my next encounter with the Catholic worker was through reading and writing and teaching. So I was a social justice teacher at a Catholic high school, and we read about and talked about Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker and read some of her writings as part of our curriculum. So that was probably 10 years or maybe a little less after the New York encounter, maybe 5 years. And then I started taking students to volunteer at the Catholic worker in San Jose, where I was teaching. And then I met some Catholic workers in Salinas as I took students down there. And that started to expand my actual experience of being with real live Catholic workers and the lives they lead.
But nowadays you've just started a house in the Portland area, right? How did you get from San Jose, those first deepening connections, to where you are today?
Yeah, so like I said, I'd been teaching high school for a long time. And at some point along that trajectory, I had a sense in prayer that I was being invited to something beyond teaching, even though I loved it and was pretty good at it. And I didn't know what that was. So I left my job and gave myself a year to figure it out. And as part of that year, I did things like go back to Japan, where I'm from, and spend some time with my grandmother and other things that I wanted to do personally. But as the year progressed and I was thinking, okay, I can't be in retirement at age 32 or whatever I was. I need to find something to do with my life. this Catholic worker thing kept coming back into my head. And I knew enough about the Catholic worker to know that each house was really different, one from the other. And so what I did was I created for myself a little tour of Catholic worker houses in California where I was living. That included, going to the San Jose worker, the Redwood City worker, San Francisco, Guadalupe, and also the LA Catholic Worker Summer Internship, where Theo, you were my person. You had been there a year or two or something, and you were the person assigned to me as my elder and mentor in the movement. And so when I started on that tour, I had planned 3 months, and I didn't expect to stay at all. I thought, okay, I'll do this for 3 months. It's the best I know in terms of what a next step could be. And I'm sure at the end of the 3 months, God will show me a way. And I'll also think, okay, this is great for these radical Catholics, but I'm meant to do something else. And there are a few key moments for me, particularly in LA, actually, that cemented my desire to not leave after 3 months. One of those was after we closed one day at the Hippie Kitchen. I can't remember what day of the week it was. It was whatever day of the week we were supposed to go to the federal building with our signs and silently vigil against war. And so this is 2011. So we would have been in, Afghanistan and Iraq both at that time. And we had our silent vigil around the federal building, carrying our posters, no blood for oil and US out of Iraq and all this. And we're praying silently. And I'm looking at, the skyscrapers around us, cars whizzing by, and I'm thinking about all the thousands of lives that are being lived in that moment, and how probably almost none of them in that moment were thinking about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I don't say that in judgment, because I know that people have their lives to live, right? And so when I was teaching high school and I was teaching War and Peace, even then I wasn't thinking every day about the actual wars we were in now, because I was thinking about lesson plans and the student over here who's not behaving and grading papers and kind of the daily concerns. Of course, there were people thinking about it every day. If they had family members serving abroad, then they were thinking about it all the time. But outside of that, by 2011, it was like, okay, this war is going on. It's been going on for a while, and we all kind of got used to it. And in that context, I thought, wow, it's a really good thing that there's this group of people who call themselves the Catholic workers, who work it into their work schedules to at least remember. Whether you're for it or against it, of course, we were against it. But even if you were for the war, if people were being killed in our name, it seemed really important to at least remember that we were doing it. And I thought, oh, gosh, the Catholic workers. And then later that week, I was at Mass, probably at Dolores Mission, and the priest does the thing that he always does, and at one point he lifts up the host and he says, "This is my body broken for you." He takes the cup and says, "This is my blood poured out for you." And coming off the heels of this protest in downtown LA, something really clicked for me, and I thought, wow, if we're called to remember Jesus in this bread that's broken and this wine that's poured out, how much more are we called to remember him in human beings whose actual bodies are broken and whose actual blood is spilt in war. And really the only people I knew had come across until then who were doing that from this faith perspective were the Catholic workers. And so I decided to join for more than 3 months. And yeah, so that was in 2011. So the last 15 years or so, I've been in and out of the movement, mostly being a full-time Catholic worker, but at various points, as life happened and I had personal reasons to move, I needed to get like a paid job to pay rent. And so there are moments along that when I've left being a full-time Catholic worker, but for the most part, I've been in it. And yeah, life took me up to Portland, Theo, to kind of get to now, which I think was your question. Life took me to Portland. Well, I left the San Jose Catholic Worker after 5 years in 2018. I had a stop in Southern Oregon and then came to Portland in 2019. I was following my partner at the time and ended up here. And then I started Dandelion House really like 3 years ago in 2022.
Can you tell us a little bit about what Dandelion House is like? What's its composition and what all do you do?
Yeah. So we're definitely an urban house of hospitality. We're a small house. We're not a big soup kitchen operation like LA or San Francisco. We're a small house of hospitality offering housing to 2 or 3 or 4 at most people in need. We also try to bring in the farm element. I mean, we're definitely not a farm, but we're on the outskirts of Portland, and I chose this location in part because we could get a slightly larger lot than you can in the city proper. And so we have half an acre, and so we combine the urban house of hospitality with, I would call it a large urban garden and growing. And that garden feeds into our street meal program. So we serve about 120 to 150 folks once a week on Fridays under the Morrison Bridge in Portland. And so we prepare a hot meal at the house and take it to under this bridge where folks congregate and offer that once a week. And the garden feeds into that. And then we have other communal gatherings. We have a monthly liturgy that we call the Cosmic Liturgy of the Divine Feminine, where we have non-hierarchical structure and communal Eucharist, and we use feminine pronouns and images for God to balance out the universe. And then we have a weekly contemplative gathering that we call Sunday Soup and Contemplation, which is specifically non-religious. The Cosmic Liturgy is obviously Christian. The Sunday Soup and Contemplation is a spiritual contemplative gathering that's really become an anchor for us and our larger community.
Where does the name Dandelion House come from? A lot of workers are named for saints or biblical allusions or famous Catholic workers. Why Dandelion?
Yeah, that's a great question. For one, I actually specifically didn't want it to be named for a saint or, Ammon Hennessy, who's famous in Catholic worker world, but not particularly outside. And the saint thing, I just wanted a name that would feel inclusive to everybody, even if you didn't subscribe to a particular religious tradition, even though we're clearly Catholic and Christian here in a lot of ways. So I had that in mind. And then Dandelion came to me one morning. I literally woke up and was like, oh, it's going to be called Dandelion House. And the associations I have with dandelions are that so many people think of dandelions as a weed and do everything in their power to uproot these plants. But in reality, they're beautiful flowers that are so resilient. And actually, you can eat the leaves. We've actually been eating dandelion salad here because it's springtime. And in spring, the leaves are quite tender and good in a salad like arugula. You can take the roots and chop it up fine and extract it in alcohol and make a tincture for your liver. In fact, I have several friends who use dandelion tincture as medicine. So this plant that's considered a weed is actually nutritious and medicinal. And that's the image I have for the folks that we serve, that in society at large, sometimes they're considered unwanted, a weed, be better just to kind of shove them aside and not have to think about them. But in reality, when we live with them, work with them, serve with them, hear their stories and center their experiences, I think they have a lot of nourishment and medicine, wisdom to offer our ailing capitalist society. We should actually be listening to them and their experiences. And then, of course, children wish upon a dandelion, and that's just a sweet, hopeful image.
I love that name. It's so playful. We had seen in a seed catalog, my wife and I, that there are pink dandelions that I think Baker Seeds produces. And we were like, we could buy a lot of pink dandelion seeds. What if we just like release them into the park, and then the park becomes known for pink dandelions? So that could be the next evolution of Dandelion House, is pink dandelions.
I had no idea. That is so cool. I might have to go find some pink dandelion seeds.
So you're a relatively newer house. I'm curious what the process was for you to get started, and how it's been going. Any growing pains or things that you've been able to reflect on that have gone incredibly well, and things that maybe have been a little more difficult?
Sure. Yeah, I feel almost embarrassed because compared to other individuals and communities that have really struggled to get going, I was just given everything I needed to start. So I have a mentor in the movement who called me one day and said, hey, we got this really large gift, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you want to start a Catholic worker in Portland, we'll give it to you. And so I said, yes, I've been wanting to start a Catholic worker in Portland. And so I received that money and then had to fundraise a little bit more above that to be able to purchase a property. And so we did. And then really all I had to do after that was quit my job and start doing the work, which was the easy part. And then in terms of sort of operating costs, again, we were so blessed because more established communities that I was connected to from my years in the movement offered to support us with monthly checks out of their bounty. And these are communities that have been around 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and have a larger support base. So the first 2 years, we were supported by monthly checks from these other communities, which helped make up the difference between what we could raise locally to keep our lights on and do the work that we were doing, and the actual cost. Now we're in year 3, and we fully expect to break even this year, and so we've told those communities as much. And so like I said, it's a little embarrassing that I don't have these stories of what a struggle it is to start a Catholic worker, and I've been really blessed by the larger Catholic worker movement, who've been anchors and great supports for us at Dandelion House.
You've been at other houses, like you've been saying before. Do you think that there's like a different feeling within the community or within yourself, like quote unquote, like founding a new house, like starting something from scratch, as opposed to like stepping in where there's been a historic community before?
Oh, definitely. So for example, when I was at Casa de Clara in San Jose, when I got there, the community had been around for 40 years. And so there's just some things that they've been doing for 40 years that me and my community could have changed, but didn't feel really was kind of our place to do, you know? So for example, for 40 years, they had been housing women and children. And that was how we were known in the community. And so we weren't, you know, then one day going to just take unhoused men or whatever. And here at Dandelion House, we've been able to experiment with kind of whatever we want, whatever spirit leads us to. So just on this issue of hospitality and who we welcome, in the 3 years, we've had such a wide range of guests. So for example, my first guest was somebody that I got to know off of the street right in front of our house. And our relationship started by me paying him to do some work around the house because I knew he needed a job. And then as I got to know him, I invited him to live for actually a very short amount of time. I knew it wouldn't be enough to get him situated somewhere else. But I also knew from my interactions with him that his personality and mental illness were such that if I lived with him for more than a month, he would just drive me nuts. But I had the space available, and I knew I had a month until I went to go see my family. And so I offered him the space as a reprieve. So that's, my very first guest. Right now we have a couple youngsters, like 19 and 21, who had been sleeping out of their cars or kicked out of their family homes and are working towards their GEDs, right? 2, young people in their 20s, men and women with long street histories and serious addictions, to an elderly immigrant couple, to a young family, like had a mom with a 1-year-old and 2-year-old. So I give this as an example of I couldn't have done experiment with all of those different things in a more established place where it's like, hey, what we do is women and children, right? And same with our other work. I definitely feel the freedom and the energy of a new house where me and my 2 other currently core community members, we might become 4 soon, get to experiment and say, hey, we like this, we don't like that, and figure it out as we go along.
Are there any big dreams you have for your community? Things that you're sort of hoping to grow in, or things that you hope to do one day?
Well, I have a few. One is to continue to grow our garden. We probably have about 8 vegetable beds right now, but we have a lot more space. We just don't have the labor capacity right now. But we have a vision for turning this whole front side, which is, I don't know, maybe 8,000 square feet or something, into a food forest. So with some annual vegetables, but also with some perennial fruit trees and shrubs and other things that can kind of work together to create our own little ecosystem that, builds up the soil and sequesters carbon. And one of the big things in the Catholic Worker, of course, is the works of mercy. And we've just been reflecting on what do the works of mercy look like in relation to the specific piece of land that you're on. And one of those things we think is caring for the soil. So we're doing that in small ways, and a dream would be to expand that. I also have this dream one day of starting a for-profit business on the side that would be able to hire some of the folks that have a harder time finding employment. And it could start with a coffee cart or whatever, but I would want it to be for-profit and actually profitable, so that we could pay folks a living wage and have that support also. It's not very, it's one of those like compromises with capitalism type things. It's not entirely creating a new system or a new world in the shell of the old. And while the old still is here, I've imagined that as a way of supporting folks make it.
Is the farming, growing food stuff something you have much experience with, or is it one of these it's a new Catholic worker, let's try something?
It's a little bit of both. I really don't have I have zero farming experience. I have, over the course of my adult life, had some gardening experience, but not a lot. And as a child, I had zero. I grew up in Tokyo, where I basically didn't see a tree until I was 18. So a lot of it is learning, experimenting, learning from mentors. I also learn well from books. It's just kind of how I learn. So I go to the library and check out every book I can on permaculture and no-till gardening, and read and try things. And luckily, we have volunteers who actually know what they're doing, and so they mentor me.
So another thing you have coming up, right, is a nonviolence pilgrimage later this year, right? Do you want to tell folks a little bit about that and what all that entails?
Yeah, we're planning for the 80th anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings this summer. We're planning what we're calling the Fierce Nonviolence Pilgrimage. You can find out more at fiercenonviolence.org. And the way we envision it is as a pilgrimage for young adults. I'm defining that as 21 to 35, but loosely. And what we'd like is to visit sites in the Pacific Northwest, where we are, and actually this time all in Washington, that are impacted by the U.S. nuclear arsenal. So on the Spokane Reservation is the Midnight Mine, which is a uranium pit where they used to mine for uranium that would become part of nuclear warheads. Then Hanford is the former site of the plutonium processing plant. So they take the uranium, and at Hanford, they would turn it into plutonium, which is what was used on the Nagasaki bomb. And there, just as in Spokane, of course, the most impacted communities are indigenous, so the Wanapom and the Yakima peoples. And in Spokane, it's the Spokane peoples. And then we would end up in the Seattle, Puget Sound area with the Trident submarine base at Bangor. And the idea is that at each of these locales, our group would hear the stories from impacted communities, including the indigenous communities I just mentioned, but also Spokane has a large Marshallese community, for example, and they've long suffered from U.S. nuclear testing above ground, right? Starting with the Bravo tests in the 50s. So we would hear, each of those stories, and then learn about the largest concentration of deployed nuclear weapons in the Puget Sound when we get to Bangor. We want to combine that with public events we would have along the way to increase awareness. My father, who is a hibakusha survivor of Hiroshima, he was 3 years old. He would come along and share his story as well. And then we would combine all of that with a 16-hour training in nonviolent social change in the lineage of Jesus of Nazareth, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. And so we're taking along some trainers with us. And my hope is to revitalize the anti-nuclear movement, involve a new generation of activists on this issue, and in this way commemorate the 80th anniversary of Hiroshima, Nagasaki. So if you all know young adults, send them to fiercenonviolence.org. Catholic workers are perfect for this.
I am realizing I am no longer young. I don't fit into the qualifications anymore.
I'm not either, but
All young at heart, right?
Mm-hmm. I don't even know, Theo, are you in that age range even?
As of this recording, I am 35, so I guess I do fit into it.
Wow.
Yeah.
We know we're getting old when Theo is no longer part of the young Catholic worker group.
Yeah, back, I guess it's been almost 15 years since I was your 21-year-old elder mentor back at the LA Catholic Worker. Yeah, you mentioned your father survived an atomic bomb back in Japan. Is that something that affected you or your family growing up? Is it something that was talked about or thought about? Does it affect you now and how you move through the world in the Catholic worker movement?
Absolutely. It was formative for me, I think. The story was mostly present growing up in its silence and it's not being spoken about. It was not something that my dad really ever touched on until the last 10 or 20 years or so. And yet it was something that would come up in small ways here and there. And we were aware of the enormity of what had happened, the gravity of it, the tragedy of it, the trauma of it. And yet we didn't talk about it. And so I've been an anti-nuclear activist at least since college, when I organized my first exhibit and invited a hibakusha to talk to other college students. And it's been foundational to the way I view the world and my role in it and my work for peace and my activism. But also when I talk about my father, so he was, just to share his story a little bit, he was 3 years old when the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And he was 1.3 kilometers from the epicenter. So within that range, almost everybody died, but he didn't. He survived miraculously. He and his twin brother and his mother were in that home at the house at the time. He tells a story of how it was their practice every morning to go for a walk. And so they had just gone for a walk in the neighborhood and come in. If they had come home a minute later, none of them would have lived. But they were in the house, miraculously survived. He lost 2 or 3 siblings that day. And then a couple other siblings that were not in town at that time, survived. A couple of things that I've been thinking about that story. One is, he was 3. He doesn't remember a lot from that day itself, though there are some details he remembers, like the smell, and now he realizes, oh, that must have been the smell of burning flesh. But mostly he remembers growing up, in later years as a young child, in a city that had been completely destroyed. And now what I think about is, gosh, in his first grade classroom, say, every other kid in that classroom would have had the same trauma that he did, right? And same thing when he was in second grade and third grade. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. What is it like to grow up among peers, classmates, all of whom, every single one, have lost family members, friends, neighbors, and grew up in a city with no buildings initially. But whenever I tell the story about my dad, I also feel like it's really important to share the story of my family from my mother's side. So on my father's side, he is a victim of an atomic bomb and of war. On my mother's side, that family were colonists in northeast China, in Manchuria, when much of East Asia was part of the Japanese Empire. My mother's side of the family chose to move as settler colonists into Manchuria to occupy it. The city they were in was renamed Shinkyo, which means new capital in Japanese, from the Chinese name Changchun, which means long spring. So they renamed this Chinese city, called it a Japanese name, and were part of this group of Japanese people who went and settled there. They had one of the biggest houses in the city, had dozens of Chinese servants who did their bidding, and upon whose labor their livelihood was built. And then one among them in that family even became a war criminal. And so he graduated from the Imperial Army Medical College with very good grades, and they assigned him to Unit 731 in Manchuria. And he was a bench scientist. He was a researcher. And he was a great researcher, except that he performed medical experiments on live prisoners of war to advance his medical research. And his unit was doing things like researching cures to ailments that the Japanese army suffered from. They were also researching biological weapons, and so that Japan could use them against civilians and soldiers in World War II. And after Japan lost the war, he was called up to Tokyo to face war crime charges by General MacArthur. And I share that because I think it's these two stories, the story of Hiroshima and the story of my great uncle, who's a war criminal, that have really shaped my view of war and peace and my desire to work for peace. I think it was Solzhenitsyn who has that famous quote, wouldn't it be great if, and I'm paraphrasing, wouldn't it be great if we could isolate all the evil people over here and all the good people over here, and then all we would have to do to create a just society is destroy the evil people. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the human heart, and who wants to destroy a piece of their own heart? And so for me, it's like in my blood are colonist, war criminal, right, perpetrator, and innocent victim of atomic bombing. And to me, that's just war. War creates innocent victims, and war creates aggressors. and begets more violence. And so that's what's prompted me as an adult to work for peace. That's ultimately what underlies this fierce nonviolence pilgrimage that I'm starting. Just a conviction that we need to approach war and peace differently.
Wow, what a fascinating story of sort of the both elements. And I think it's so easy sometimes. I think especially there's a tendency, I don't know, perhaps with social media or the idea of sensationalism of like this dichotomy of like either or, you know. And I think, you know, your story, your family history really encapsulates how messy it becomes. That, yeah, this evil, this violence, it's all a part of us. And probably what a good reminder to hold that, especially in this political climate where it's very easy to view the other as the aggressor and to forget that we all hold these parts within us.
Yeah, that's right.
So if someone was interested in going on this peace walk, how would they apply? What would they do to try to sign up for something like this?
Yeah, they just go on fiercenonviolence.org, and it's just the website is a few different pages, few different tabs. Read through, make sure it's what you want, and then there's a big apply button at the top right, and it's just a Google form that's there to submit your information and why you want to go. And that's really it. There is a suggested sliding scale donation to go, but if you want to go, and I think it slides to as low as $100 for this 11-day trip. But if that's an obstacle, you can still come.
Amazing. Is there anything else while we're wrapping up you want to say about Dandelion House or about the pilgrimage?
I think what I want to share is just what a privilege and joy this Catholic worker life is. I think, the two of you get it. There's nothing like this that I found at least, that quite offers the freedom to experiment with life and try things out. And I just so appreciate that about the Catholic worker. Like this fierce nonviolence pilgrimage, it could totally flop. Like, who knows? I haven't done it before. And I'll have tried it, there's something creative and exciting to me about this movement that allows you to engage the world in meaningful ways without being constrained by much of anything. And I think it's especially true in a new community, like we were talking about earlier. So check us out on the web, dandelionhouse.org. Come visit us. Yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I was a little bit what's the word I'm looking for? Intimidated when Theo texted, because I was like, wait, but Catherine Morris has spoken on this, and Denzi Hernandez, and Martha Hennessy. Did you have Martha? It's like, what am I going to add to this conversation? You got all these, just veterans, and I'm just whatever, tiny little Catholic worker in Portland trying to figure it out.
Some would say 15 years counts as a veteran.
Yeah, it just feels like I'm experimenting every day and just kind of trying to figure it out. Other people have there's like Catherine Morris. Come on, she's got a gravitas and wisdom, and
I guess that's part of the beauty of the Catholic worker, right? Is we're all empowered to be I guess, the experts in our own contexts of our own homes.
Yeah. I guess that's right.
And there's maybe always like a certain amount of just trying to figure it out as you go along, you know?
Yeah, totally. I appreciate too, especially in the last years, I feel like there's just a lot of conversation about, okay, let's not be Catholic worker fundamentalists, you know, like let's not just do it the way this house has done it for 50 years or the way Dorothy and Peter envisioned it. Like, we can try do things. Maybe it's a little unorthodox. Let's try it. I've appreciated those conversations for sure. Well, thank you for your time and for inviting me to join you. And Lydia, I hope I get to meet you in person someday.
Yeah, come on out to Chicago. Come see us.
Yeah. And Theo, enjoy the LA celebration, and thanks for going out to Oak Flat. That's important.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm sure both will be edifying in their own ways.
Yeah.
So Theo, you had a strong influence on Fumi, and I guess we can give you some of the credit or kudos for his longevity in the Catholic worker journey.
I guess so. I think the term we used at the LA Worker was touch-in or something. More of a conduit from the community to Fumi, I think was my intention, but I'll take any little bit of credit I can claim for helping spark such a great Catholic worker as Fumi. One of the things that really stuck out with me from our conversation was that what drew him to the Catholic worker, at least in one moment, was kind of just this being conscious of the world. You know, he talked about being out there at the anti-war silent vigil, and just how much is going on in our world, and with the busyness of life, how difficult it can be to just sit down and contemplate these big things like war being done in our name and stuff like that. I think that's another thing I appreciate about the worker too, is just being able to take time for like clarification of thought, and being able to take time to consider like the big issues of our day.
Yeah. And it almost feels like there's this juxtaposition of these big issues and needing to both like remember and do some sort of action about these they're enormous issues, right? War has been a struggle since the beginning of humanity. And then it's sort of juxtaposed with like also this value of like, and the small things are important. That there's not this idea that the silent vigil is necessarily going to end war tomorrow, but that there's still this value in it, in holding to values, to morals, to what we believe is right, and acting on it in whatever capacity we're able to.
Yeah, and another thing I took away from this conversation is Fumi just talking about like the freedom to experiment with life. I think he phrased it, you know, like feeling free to try to do something about these things, you know, what, even if that's something as simple as, you know, a prayerful vigil or whatever it is. I felt too, you know, he talked a little bit about feeling free to experiment with the works of mercy at a newer house compared to, you know, when he was taking over the San Jose worker that had been there for 40 years. And just feeling like encouraged that there are so many ways to do it. There's different things to try, and wherever we find ourselves, it will look different, and we will need to try different things, big and small.
Yeah, yeah. And thinking about small things, I love the name of their house, Dandelion House, of dandelions being such a small little plant, and yet they can multiply. The park near us right now is full of dandelions, because the city a few years ago, fortunately, stopped spraying for them. And so now's the time of year. It's just beautiful. You look out and it's just this huge sea of yellow, just gorgeous. And it just brings a smile of the start of spring, these tiny little yellow things.
Have you been out there harvesting any greens? Fumi says it's like arugula.
We have not. I'm not sure that I entirely trust things that come from the park. Maybe we can experiment with some in our own little community garden. I don't know that I would be brave enough at this point to forage for the dandelion greens in the park. We will sometimes for some of the berries on the trees, but for some reason, since they're not on the ground, it feels a little better.
Not a total illogical position to have there. Maybe you should try some of those pink dandelions next year in the community garden.
We would like to. We've thought, like, what would happen if we, I don't know, just sort of release some into the wild? Like, could we have the park then, like, known for pink dandelions? Who knows?
Yeah. Lindsay of our house at the St. Louis Catholic Worker was a little bit jealous that Fumi got to dandelion before we did. She thought it was a really good name.
Oh, that's funny. Well, for anybody who's listened to this podcast and is interested in Fumi's peace pilgrimage, definitely would encourage you to go to fiercenonviolence.org to find out more about it, to be able to go meet Fumi, meet his father, and learn more about nonviolence. Those dates are from July 28th to August 7th, so you can go over, check out what they'll be doing, and see if that's something that could be interesting for you. I do think that there is at least in Chicago, I've noticed a bit of a resurgence in interest in anti-war efforts and in peace efforts. And so I do think that's encouraging, that there are more events like this happening to hopefully just bring awareness that, like, this is an option, that war is not the only option, and that there are dedicated people who are going to focus on nonviolence.
Yeah, everyone should check it out. It'll be great.
Well, that wraps up for us another episode of Coffee with Catholic Workers. You can always contact us with any comments, suggestions, clarifications of thought at coffeewithcatholicworkers@gmail.com. We want to thank Chris for editing our audio, David Hayes for our music, and Becky McIntyre for our graphic.
Thanks for joining us again for some clarification of thought. We hope today's conversation has been enlightening, and maybe even that you're encouraged to go out and help build a world where it's easier to be good.